"My daddy is in heaven. Can you help us get home?" said a little boy to the lonely CEO at the airport. The storm outside the airport windows roared like a wounded beast, rattling the glass and flooding the runway with sheets of silver rain. Travelers grumbled over canceled flights, mothers soothed crying babies, and business people paced with restless impatience. But among that restless chaos stood a man whose heart felt just as thunderous and hollow as the sky above. Alexander Ward, a wealthy CEO known for his brilliance, power, and an emptiness he had learned to wear like a second skin. He had come to the airport to escape, maybe from work, maybe from himself, but he did not expect that his life was about to collide with a moment that would shake him, soften him, and quietly save him. Because just as he lowered his briefcase and rubbed his tired eyes, he felt a tiny tug at the end of his coat, and then a trembling little voice rose through the airport noise. "My daddy is in heaven. Can you help us get home? If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that touch hearts, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us grow and bring more meaningful stories to you." Alexander froze as he turned to see a small boy, about 5 years old, dripping with rain, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit whose seams had clearly survived more love than fabric. Behind him stood a young mother, pale with exhaustion, her clothes slightly damp, eyes carrying the weight of someone who had cried quietly for days. The boy looked up at Alexander with a fragile mixture of hope and fear, while the mother, unable to meet his gaze, gently apologized and tried to pull her child close. But something in the boy's plea pierced straight through the armor around Alexander's heart. The airport lights reflected in the child's eyes, making them shine with an innocence that felt too raw for the storm-battered evening. Alexander, a man whose life was scheduled down to the second, found himself strangely unable to turn away. The mother explained softly, her voice cracked and uneven, that they had traveled to attend the funeral of her husband, the boy's father, who had passed away unexpectedly in another city. Their return flight had been canceled due to the storm. They had run out of money after medical bills and travel costs, and the boy, unaware of the adult burdens around him, had simply asked the first kind-looking person for help. The mother's face flushed with embarrassment as she apologized again. But Alexander wasn't listening to the details as much as he was watching the small hands clenched around the stuffed rabbit, as though afraid the world might take that away too. The CEO had wealth, influence, and more privilege than he ever cared to admit. Yet for all he possessed, he had never known what it felt like to be needed in such a pure, uncalculated way. Something shifted inside him, a gentle cracking of a long frozen place. He led them to a quieter corner of the airport, away from the cold stares of hurried strangers. As they sat, the storm outside intensified, and Alexander realized he too had weathered storms of his own, a childhood marked by silence, a father who treated affection like a foreign currency, and a life so packed with achievements that he had forgotten how to feel anything real. The mother shared fragments of her story as she tried to keep her composure. Her husband had been a firefighter, a man who risked his life daily, not for glory but out of a deep, unwavering love for others. When he passed away during a rescue mission, the world not only stole her partner, but also the future she had built in her mind. Now she was heading home with their son, carrying grief that felt heavier than any luggage she had brought. Alexander listened quietly, his chest tightening with every detail. Despite having lived a life filled with numbers, contracts, and strategic decisions, he realized he didn't need logic to understand her pain. He only needed a heart. When the boy curled beside his mother, shivering slightly, Alexander instinctively removed his expensive coat and placed it around them. The mother tried to refuse, but he insisted with a firmness softened by sincerity. The boy's eyes slowly drifted closed, trusting the warmth he had been offered. Something about that trust made Alexander breathe differently, as though he had just remembered an emotion he had lost long ago. Hours passed, and the storm began to calm. Alexander used his connections to secure them a hotel room for the night, refusing to let them sleep on airport chairs. The mother's eyes widened with disbelief and gratitude as he assured her everything was taken care of. But the moment that struck Alexander the deepest came when the little boy stirred awake, looked up at him, and whispered that his daddy used to help people too, that helping someone was how you could be like a hero. The voice said it so innocently that Alexander felt tears rush to his eyes unexpectedly, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since childhood. Those words wrapped around him like a beam of simple truth he never knew he needed. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds like a promise, gilding the airport windows with warm light. Alexander personally walked the mother and her son to the gate after arranging their tickets home. As they prepared to board, the little boy hugged him tightly around the waist, thanking him for being like a hero too. Alexander touched the child's head gently, overwhelmed by an emotion he couldn't name. When the mother whispered that she didn't know how to repay him, he simply shook his head. Some things, he realized, weren't meant to be repaid. They were meant to be passed forward. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue bringing more emotional and meaningful stories to you. Before the mother and child disappeared down the jet bridge, Alexander found himself whispering a promise he never knew he had the strength to make, that he would carry this moment with him, not as a businessman, not as a CEO, but as a human being capable of kindness. And as he stood there watching them leave, the airport no longer felt like a place he wanted to escape from. For the first time in years, he felt grounded, as though the storm within him had finally begun to quiet. Special request: before you go, drop a comment below. What part of the story touched your heart the most?